Okay, so I thought today that I would give you an overview of the ghost ship project. I'm actually using two cameras today, the Action 5, and I think this is the Action 2 that I like to use for close-up shots whenever I'm doing video, and actually shut off, so I'm recording this for a second time. But the other day I did an overview of the whole project, and I was using the newer dolly, which was kind of wobbling across the floor. And so I wasn't exactly sure if the footage came out. So I thought I would do another one today. And usually the stabilization on these cameras are amazing, but I'll have two, and it'll be kind of two descriptions. So kind of to start off, what this project came out of, for about the last 4 years or so, a group of us have been part of this multimodal project. Somehow during the project, we came up with the idea of a remix or remixing as a trope or an idea or a way, a method, I guess, to explore our projects. Since the project has been going, people have come and gone. We've brought on new members, some members have left us, and I know that for this last phase, which is the installation here in November 2025, Merchant House, Merchant Hall here in New Orleans, we had a call for proposals, and a lot of people were selected, and over 40 artists, anthropologists are participating. You're going to see that in my other video showing you the entirety of the space, but it's quite marvelous. And what I love about it is it shows the diversity out there in terms of how people have approached their projects, with modes of representation, with messages, with concepts. I mean, using the postal system here on postcards is brilliant. And then we have visual films, we have artwork on the wall, we've got sound booths, we have a glacier monument memorial with tombstones. So the different media that people use is inspiring to me, and I think it's a great project, by the way, for graduate students to see this. And I had some amazing conversations last night for a big blowout party with the three various societies from the AAA, and I was talking right in this space here, just above the Bud Light can. By the way, this morning, someone from the cleaning staff said they thought that was real trash, so it reminded me of the whole story about Marcel Duchamp and one of his ready-mades, how it was literally thrown away by a cleaner in his flat in France ages ago, of course. So that mission accomplished on the epoxy beer can cigarette concoction I made. But you know, the conversations last night were so inspiring to me with the graduate students, because they had so many questions, and I feel like this space here, the Ghost Ship Project, is about exploring questions, not offering answers. It's about creating maybe little flashes of insight, the punctum of photography that Roland Barthes talked about. You know, I feel like you can do that with installations, with sound, and we're going to go through all the components. I love reading this morning. Dear Muse, it is you who inspires, even those of us who will never know you or what inspirational activity you take part in, are now inspired by your very you-ness. Thank you. Love. That's very cool. One of the components of this is to have a visitor's log, and people can write in it as they see fit. So yeah, the project, which included meetings at UC Irvine in person, UT Austin, which I attended on Zoom, was really trying to formalize, I think, questions about ethnographic representation. How can we represent our various objects and projects? And then the remix component of it in our group was to say, how can Craig throw out an idea, which was his original Tales from the Anthropocene type postcards or greeting cards, and then Florian, one of his colleagues from UT Austin, took it and remixed it. And I'm sorry, there's other collaborators in this project, and I'm forgetting some of the names, but please watch my overview video later, and we'll see some of the additional work. There are 40 artists in total here, artists, anthropologists, so it's quite a large group, and it's impossible for me to remember everyone who is involved, of course. So the remixing eventually interfaced with the spectral, with the ghosts, and that was really the theme of AAA this year. And so we called the whole thing Spectral Remix. And you can look at the website, spectralremix.org. So for me, the ghost, the specter, is a great metaphor for looking at these concepts and doing this remix project. I think it was Craig, by the way, who said, and I've said Craig's the MVP of the show, because he has been working his ass off doing everything for this show. I've never seen someone work so hard. He is by far, he's taken over this whole thing, and he's seen it through the whole week. I mean, he's literally done everything in here. He's the one guy that's been putting up the lights. I was helping him yesterday. I'm kind of filling in right now. He's going to do a session. But Craig's amazing. He absolutely has passion for this and vision. And if it weren't for Craig, there's no way this project would have happened. He is the superstar. And it was Craig who said, let's do an installation at AAA. Craig and friends found Merchant House, and Rosa and the crew who let us rent Merchant Hall have been absolutely amazing. So thank you to them for everything they've done. It's a wonderful, wonderful space. I can't get over the location, Lower Garden District, etc. Amazing space. Now, let's transition into the Ghost Ship project. Again, I want to give you the description of how this emerged. I've been working with George Marcus going back to 1993 when I started as a PhD student at Rice University, and George is still working there. He's now at UC Irvine, so it's fortuitous or cool for us to be able to work together, because I'm also on the West Coast, and it's just super easy to get together and collaborate. So we had been working for over these 4 years in our remix groups. Originally, Stuart Candy was a part of that. He dropped from the project, but I actually used Stuart's Thing from the Future card deck quite a bit in my courses, so he was certainly inspirational in this project. And kind of thought of him, or maybe a shout out to Stuart, was the interactive card deck here that you can use, which has a gaming component to it. Pick a card, a truth card, and do what it says or think about what it says. So I've been working with George all these years, and when I heard that the theme was specters or ghosts for AAA, I said, well, George, there's this cool quote that some people may know about. It's printed here. Who better than George Marcus to steer the ghost ship of anthropology, basically, from Mick Taussig. So I said, let's use that quote as a jumping off point. And very specifically, let's ask the question, transition over here. This is my little joke, the entrance to the ethnography lab. But I said to AI, so this whole project is really being remixed through AI. And let me show you, kind of jumping around peripatetic Scott this morning, but here are the authors. So George, me, Ghost Ship Captain, who's kind of the spectral presence, and then the Ghost Captain bot, which is kind of ChatGPT, Sora, Gemini, Canva, Midjourney, and Firefly. So this set of instructions, if you will, is the Ghost Captain bot, which I created. It's very easy to create on ChatGPT. And then I was originally going to have an iPad right here as part of the exhibit. Lo and behold, I ran out of room. In fact, I so much ran out of room that I repurposed the other night this trash can, and I had this extra paper and I just kind of threw it on. So I didn't have room to bring the iPad, plus the iPad is a pain with charging and batteries and all that kind of stuff, and Wi-Fi, and using the Pro ChatGPT account. So instead I said, let me print out some of the key questions. One of the key questions, for example, is what if folks can't distinguish between the various authors in here? Well, guess what? It's kind of the point of the exhibit. For years I've been studying or engaged in experimental performance, experimental writing. And for me, the idea that somehow when you remix, you can perfectly tell a source from source sub 2, sub 3, sub 4 is ridiculous, right? You cannot, in any kind of literary illusion or remixing in jazz music and classical music, you can't always tell, right, the original from the source. Think Baudrillard, think Benjamin, etc. So I think this idea of authorship that is uncertain, that is uncanny, which we think of robots, the uncanny valley, etc., transhumanism with ChatGPT right now, which you see reflected throughout the exhibit here, I think you begin to understand that this is not about like trying to define, who the author is in this case. In fact, talking to those graduate students last night, and we should have gotten your names, but we were standing right here and we were chatting about the tapestry of culture. So if you're watching this, please give me a shout out and let's connect, because you were inspirational in your thoughts about AI last night. And it kind of proved that this project does make sense, or it makes sense as a pedagogical tool. And I work very much in multimodal pedagogy. I've been doing this for years. And in fact, I would have loved to even make a full-blown escape room for this experience, because I do an escape room in my archaeology that I teach, my in-person class. So the bot here then kind of expresses the main questions. How would you explain this to a 4-year-old? What would positives say about the ghost ship project? Why did experimental ethnography not materialize? That takes us back to here. Hey, camera 2. And by the way, this is kind of a joke. Welcome to the ethnography lab. It's the bathrooms. I didn't use the bathrooms, but over here we have our QR code, moving vine. And then these are some of the postcards I created with AI. By the way, the other postcards are over here and also on the table. And these have been a hit. I took 100 of these and I plastered the Marriott and the Sheraton, the AAA meeting the other day. I put one on every table, every lectern, every water and pen stand in the back. I put it on coffee tables, any space I could find. And in fact, someone came in brandishing one of the flyers, the postcards, and they said, I found this upstairs on the 5th floor. I said, cool, it worked. And hi, George. I'm doing a overview. George is here now, so he can say hi. I'm just doing my video overview of the project, filling in for Craig. So this is a legendary George Marcus.
Oh.
Yeah.
This is just view of the art.
Yeah, and then George, so I was just saying that, so the connection here, this is the mic, so this is the Mick quote. Mm-hmm. And so I was saying this is kind of the impetus of it, and then for me the connection is to that flyer there, which ChatGPT wrote, and it says, George Marcus saw the ghost ship emerge. I don't love this poem with good ideas. I would never, you would never write that in a poetic, but it's sort of like it's drifting away. And so really, since you're here now, what's your thought on, was it ever your intention that you would start, we were talking at lunch yesterday, had this amazing lunch. We were talking about how, certain folks like Marvin Harris and others started actual schools. Was it your thought that writing culture would lead to a movement? Or was it a fire under the ethnographic feet, so to speak?
No, never thought it would actually be a movement, but I did think it would have effect.
Yeah.
And the extent of it, I didn't know. But what was emergent at that time was a much broader critical cultural studies movement, you could call, which is now in the past. In the rear view. And it was, I thought, kind of, not inevitable, but likely that might happen. But I never personally counted on it.
Right.
I'm trying to edit myself as I'm talking here.
No, and I can edit later too.
In some ways that anthropologists generally, why should I speak for anthropologists rather than myself, are worldly, but they're also, in a sense, very parochial.
Yes.
And I think that at that moment, what writing culture did was we weren't the only ones, but it created an anthropology that reflected what the emerging generations were doing. Right. And I think that in retrospect, I don't want to make a speech of it, but in retrospect, I think that you can see that in the roots of it. Yeah. So it's all in the rearview mirror after the fact. None of us ever planned. Maybe. Who knows? I don't think any of those who involved in the writing culture thing, but I think Jim Clifford was looking for a larger
institutionalization or
attachment to the theory moment for himself. That, but I can't. I really shouldn't speak for him. But I think we were all intensely ambitious for the work we were doing. But none of us planned a kind of Marxist. Far from Marx.
Like a similar
plan.
Disciplinary focus. I think for me, one of the challenges, when I reflect back on my Rice days, and we were reminiscing how things have changed, because of course people have retired. You moved on to UCI. Other folks have left. You brought on new people, but for me, anthropology as a discipline, there's always this spirit. In fact, in the exhibit, one of the Easter eggs I was carrying around last night during our party is the spirit of Comte. Whenever I teach research methods, I deliberately have these two chains, sort of foundational tracks. One is, of course, Comte, and it's the empiricist sort of approach, which I loathe. And again, you can see the reflections on positive of them that ChatGPT was, I guess, channeling my id. But I have this other track that comes from a Piro of Ellis, and he was a skeptic, and he was someone who talked about this idea of a catalepsy and trying to represent nature, but also trying to really see that fundamentally it's impossible to represent something. So I think, and I don't know if this is true, that what I learned from being at Rice and writing culture and all the seminars and workshops, events, is that there's sort of a guiding force there, like a ghost, not to get too corny with our AAA theme. And it's sort of just like conceptual art. It pushes you in directions, but it doesn't have that literalism. It doesn't have that sort of audacity of the empiricist positivist school that says, I can teach you how to. And I think years later, I always said to Steve, how would you do this stuff? And I think both you and Steve would say, no, you have to discover it. We're giving you that force to progress. We're not showing you, quote unquote, a method. So I don't know how you think about that.
What an optimistic statement from Steve.
Yeah, from Steve, who's represented, by the way. George dug up that piece there, which is his original submission for the Santa Fe workshop.
Oh, yeah.
That became Writing Culture.
Yeah, he wrote in a way that you thought he just sat down and wrote quote unquote poetry.
Yeah.
But actually, like most things with Steve, it was well planned out.
Yeah.
And in going through my papers, I found the set of documents of everybody who was asked to submit what they were going to do. Right. And I was really impressed by Steve, because the result was something that was poetry, but actually,
and it looks nothing
very
like that.
Carefully designed this.
Rigorous.
I don't know why it should surprise me. That's the way we work. But in that case, it was so other in that collection.
Right.
Like there were others, like for instance, Paul Rabineau, who was the opposition within.
Right.
And very powerful.
Yeah.
In some ways, Writing Culture. Paul was the. If you look at it, everybody was struggling with the paradigm.
Yeah.
But Paul Rabineau very explicitly was dealing with the inadequacies of the kind of representation we were recommending experimenting with.
Right.
But he sort of was basically saying that the realities would escape some sort of project of rewriting culture or writing culture.
Right.
Yeah, so that was an important thing.
Yeah.
But it's all, most people have read it. It's kind of obvious.
But you never anticipated it was going to lead to, because there was celebration and then there was huge controversy. And I think that some folks, May Shalise and these folks, I was on a panel with her, by the way, one time. She got thrown onto a panel with me, and I thought we were very cordial, but they reacted to it, and they sort of they created this patriarchal straw man. Kind of.
Well,
you know what I mean? It was a gender.
These were all guys. Except for the partner of Renato. Right. And by the article that May Shalise and the other published, they wanted to say feminism was there first and more powerfully.
Yes.
Okay. That was those times.
And then the empiricists, the Marvin Harrises of the world, they were jumping onto it too. It was, I think, they were being very opportunistic because they were saying, we've got to save anthropology. It's empiricists by God, and these guys are, and George and I, we talked so often about, you never accepted the term postmodernism, but yesterday you said at lunch that you kind of rode the wave a little bit with the aesthetic postmodernism.
I did.
Yeah.
I was enjoying it.
It
was more like enjoyment. I enjoyed it more than I felt critical about it.
Right.
Yeah. But I was never very serious about it in terms of my own. So if you look at my own writings, postmodernism's in there as a reference point for where we work. But I never take it on, and I was grateful to Jameson's thorough tying it to a kind of Marxist investigation. And so forth and so on.
So I think for me, this again, I kind of just this morning discovered the bookends. I said, this is the quote. And then this, and again, it's kind of my wife Krista would say it's a crappy poem, but I like.
Who did that poem?
That was AI.
Oh, hey, I
Yeah,
did it.
I just said write a poem that talks about sort of the struggle to look at the legacy of experimentalism post-writing culture.
Yeah.
It's not good, but I like the drifting away part because again, I think Mick was saying, I think Mick was grasping onto this idea that you identified this sort of investigation through journalism, through interviews, a possibility coming up to the year 2000 of what anthropology was going to become.
Yeah.
Through the how many volumes were there? There were
Of what?
of late editions.
8.
8, which is pretty crazy.
We got started late.
Yeah.
There's supposed to be one for each.
One for each year.
Yeah, I have to say that it was kind of the most important project that I've ever done.
Wow,
It
okay.
was a realization of dialogue. It played out. It was organized. It had a frame. The books themselves, and I maybe blame myself,
Yeah.
were not well edited. And
Oh,
therefore,
okay. Huh.
there was a lot of stuff coming out at that time.
Yeah.
And it never made it big, struck anybody.
Yeah.
Today, I have to, or anybody that talks about that history
Yeah.
has to remind them about late editions, which is sad because in some ways, when I go back to those volumes, of course, everybody could say this about
Yeah,
their
yeah,
past work,
yeah.
but okay, so I'm doing that.
Yeah.
But when I go back to those volumes, I find incredible pieces that bring that fin de siècle back
yeah.
in powerful ways that anthropology at its best, trying to be contemporary. That was Paul's project.
Yeah.
How do we be contemporary, postmodern, blah, blah, blah. All, behind it all was how to live in a moving world.
Right.
Kind of
Right.
the ethnographic ideology of
Yeah.
research. And there are a number of other little things in there that are kind of interesting. The writing culture was before, like, Michael and Rabineau shifted to science studies.
Right. Yep. Science studies.
In 86, 85, 86, within the realm of anthropology, but for that matter, critical cultural studies, the idea of investigating science as
Right.
a way of investigating was very marginal.
Yeah.
And I remember it wasn't unwelcome, it was just odd.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the volume we did. Oh, now I'm talking about late.
No, but yeah, it's
one
connected.
Of the
So
strongest volumes, and it has actually one of the most record of citations was Techno-Scientific Dimension
Oh yeah.
with Joe Dumas,
Yes.
a magisterial ethnography
Brilliant.
of a medical technology
Yeah.
discovery,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That book really captured, just by what people were talking about,
Yeah.
all sorts of themes that were to become
Yeah,
kind of major
yeah, absolutely.
touch points
Yeah.
in science stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, but, and I'm also thinking about just the energy, the one volume I was a part of, I just remember very vividly our editorial meeting. And, I've done edited collection, I've been part of, I don't know how many, 20 or so. And that's such a rare thing. And I've always envisioned, I've done a little bit of this with a group in Germany where we would do on-site investigations of theme parks, and then we would try to reflect on it after the fact. And I think for me, one of the challenges of this remix project was people coming and going, and what I would love to see is membership that stays very stable, and then maybe we do this over, and we might try to redo this in some other spaces, but take it and reinvestigate it in new installations with new audiences, I think.
Scott, I would push it back on you because
Yeah.
you sort of evoked it. Because
Okay.
I've been fascinated by your own trajectory of, sort of the evil surrounding the production of theme parks.
Yeah.
And nobody was doing that at the
No,
time. Even
no.
in popular,
Yeah.
popular culture study.
Pop culture, yeah.
Nothing of that,
Right.
you'll forgive, profundity. But then you got into immersive environments.
Yeah,
And
actually creating them.
I
Yeah.
actually thought that should be, it requires translation.
Right, right.
But the handbook that you wrote on
Right.
immersive environments was what a kind of framing for ethnography
Yeah, yeah.
or an ethnographic research
Yeah,
project
yeah.
could become.
Yeah.
Because it preserved in a very sensible and manageable way a kind of holism that is still
Right.
deep within
The tradition,
ideology, even
yeah,
people
yeah.
who reject it.
Yeah.
There's a quality to ethnographic
Yeah,
research
yeah.
which is pushed by the
Yeah.
holism
Right,
ethos,
right.
but totally impractical
Yeah,
and ridiculous
yeah.
unless you do something like you said. But you never made the connection because you were making a career at that point in consulting or talking to people who needed to
Yeah,
whatever they were
specifically
doing
Disney
to
and
absorb this idea.
Yep.
And you can edit this. if
Oh
you
yeah,
want
we'll
to.
edit, of course.
When
Yeah.
we had a conversation
Yeah.
before this, you said you were working on some sort
Yeah.
of subsequent book,
Subsequent book. Yeah. And
which is what?
so, well,
What's it
if we
called?
walk over here,
Yeah.
so George is referring to the Immersive Worlds Handbook, which it has sold pretty good. I mean, I
love the
I get
idea
like,
that
you know, a couple
produced
thousand
it
a
in
year
that
from
form.
that.
It wasn't
Yeah.
one of these immersive.
Oh no,
worlds
it's
new
kind of
thing on the block.
it's a how-to
Handbook
book.
means
Yeah.
how-to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But encompasses
Yep.
the whole ideology
Yeah,
of
yeah.
holism, which was
Which is still
really,
Yeah.
in a way, colonial.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the whole idea that you recreate
Right.
these embedded
Right,
cultures
right.
in terms of
Right.
it saved the culture
Right.
concept or the ethno idea of ethno. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
I could
yeah.
go on about
No,
that.
so
It's
that
obvious
no,
stuff.
it's a good segue to explain the
what
table
should-
here.
Tell me
So
about this
yeah, very
follow-up
specifically.
to Immersive
So the
Handbook.
follow-up book, which we talked about in some of the earlier meetings, I've kind of called it the Experimental Worlds Handbook. And in the initial handbook, there was going to be not a spinner, but there was going to be this dial. It was going to be a wheel, and there would be different cutouts. And I specifically wanted to have, you know, surrealistic, Dadaistic, different artistic movements, and then their quote techniques. For practical reasons, the press said it would be too expensive to produce that wheel, but the idea was you'd spin it and you'd get inspired to do collage, or you would do a game or some concept art. So the thought is, in the next version, it would all be this sort of, these movements coming into effect, the creation of spaces. And there's a connection to the Anthropocene, which is part of my kind of really teaching stuff I do. So this is what George is talking about. I have one folder that includes those papers, if you will. So this is actually a funny one. It's the Academic Anthropology Conferences Simulator. It's pretty boring, right? So you go to a conference and you get on the ride, but the ride is just watching some dude speak in front of a PowerPoint. So these are the images that sort of are trying to inspire some idea, what George is talking about for that future project.
Of yours.
Yeah, the Experimental World Handbook. I don't know what it'll be. I feel like I need another year to ruminate on it. In the first version, in the Immersive Worlds Handbook, I interviewed kind of, I don't want to say traditionalists, I mean, Henry Jenkins is in there. The guy who designed all of Steve Wynn's casinos is in there. But it's very practical. It's like, here's how you create a space.
Right, because the idea was to present it to people
who are
for
doing
commercial or
doing
whatever
spaces,
reason,
museum
trying to
design,
create that.
But the
one is
next
a leap.
version would leap into more sort of saying, let's continue to design spaces, but let's focus on experimentalism, whatever that possibly means.
Yeah.
Conceptually, representationally. And I think tied to the Anthropocene, because I feel like that's the big push right now with multi-species work, with all the stuff in ethnography, you know, Anna Singh's mushroom thing. It's very like this movement back to, I guess, to nature in a sense.
She's, since the mushroom book,
Yeah.
which was very successful.
Which is very
she's
successful.
produced a number of things with more teams and
Collaborative.
more collaborative,
Yeah.
more spread
Yeah.
out, more unwieldy as books.
Right.
So I have a couple of them.
Okay,
To be
yeah.
honest with you, I haven't read them.
Yeah.
I've flipped through
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
And it seems to me, unless you're powerfully interested in this, it's not that welcoming. Not like
Right,
the
right.
mushroom book was.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, it
yeah.
was it was the multi-sided,
Right.
strategic kind of work.
Yeah.
So I don't have the ideas, and you're sort of burgeoning, expressing them about what the evolution of this
What it could be.
other
Yeah,
this
yeah.
immersive.
Yeah.
It's not immersive. It's
Well, I was saying
did
experimental
immersive.
worlds, but it
Yeah,
could be.
experimental worlds.
I don't know. It's just a working title. But right now, actually, Craig left. He's doing a workshop this morning on experimental ethnographic spaces, and we have a kind of buddy, a guy we know of, an artist years ago at Rice who set up this little bodega, this little town, and I'm thinking maybe this is the future.
Abdel?
Yeah, Abdel. To
You mentioned his name.
Well, we could create these sorts of spaces. In fact, we said, what if we brought this to UCI, to UC Irvine, and maybe this could be the capstone piece, and we could have other graduate projects. Maybe this iteration could be AI, but each time we do this, we could have a thematic, and then we would do installations. They could be multimedia, they could be art, AI projects, etc.
Yeah.
Because part of me thinks that maybe the moment of doing traditional ethnographic analytical text has passed, and maybe we need to do this other stuff. There isn't a lot of text here, right? I mean, there isn't a lot of I don't think there's a single text here other than, of course, transcripts from videos.
If one cares enough about anthropology and academia, a transition to a form beyond the text or the book.
Right.
Of course, that was in writing culture.
Yeah,
I mean, it's been ongoing.
Right.
And but you're talking about a very, maybe liberal-minded,
But conservative
institution.
representationally, yes.
And therefore, people's jobs
Yeah,
are based on
yeah.
contributing,
Yeah.
to the
To the
traditions of
proper journals,
scholarship,
yes.
et cetera. I mean, I don't put that down,
Yeah.
but I'm just sort of saying, where could we find the space? And there is a space.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the anthropology of theater of arts.
Right.
It has its own space.
Yeah.
It's designed to be quite marginal.
Yeah.
Many people are interested in
Right.
it. It requires a different kind of experience or education. That's what I'm finding.
Yeah.
And I don't have it, but
Yeah.
I know people who do. And the real leap is finding, and that's why, in some ways, these past years, I've really pushed the idea of collaboration.
Yeah.
You could say, well, who hasn't? But my specific context for it is I said multi-sided ethnography really produced a lot lesson or books, model books,
Right.
but in dissertation projects.
Yeah.
And they're if you look at them, they're interesting. Most of them never see the light of day as publication,
Right.
or if they do, they're chopped up in their articles, or they become a book a la mode.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not complaining about that. I'm just sort
yeah.
of saying that there's a space for a kind of collaborative practice, which is not the space, the study space of various kinds of art disciplines.
And maybe not the
That
space
comes-
of conferences, because I think so. I mean,
Conferences.
specifically
conferences,
AAA, where you're giving rigorous papers, and I find it so
I don't find
yesterday,
very rigorous.
so.
Yeah, you mean the ideology?
Yeah, the ideology of it, and again, there's an expectation. You have to
people are
present in a
making-
certain way.
Yeah.
Hi. Hi. We're doing a little media.
Oh, Rice.
It's the Rice crew. It's the Rice crew.
Yeah.
The Rice diaspora.
Yeah, but what I'm a little worried about is when you give these things, unless
Yeah.
you're involved in a really exciting project
Yeah.
that is transforming things, it sounds like
Yeah.
complaining.
Yeah. I wonder if should we
Sorry.
pause for them to say hi?
Oh yeah.
Look, we
could
can turn
do
this
that.
off. Let's
but
do that.
anyhow,
Oh.
What are you doing today?
Oh, I'm covering for Craig, and then no event tonight, but if you want, 6 p.m. tonight, a radical art group is taking over our projector, I guess.
okay.
At 6 p.m.
I might be able to do that.
Yeah.
Scott, tell me a little bit about your evolution after the production of your very unusual dissertation on theme parks, and also the sort of what goes on in them that others don't see.
Yeah, so, I think when I did that dissertation, it was really more about the service industry, sort of organizational anthropology. There was this experimental thing in there calling it Signal 3, which was a radio code that went out when there was a death in the theme park. And I remember Doug Holmes, who's a frequent collaborator with the Rice folks. Doug was always coming to workshops. He married Pam Smart, who was a graduate of the program a couple years before me. But Doug was really taken with how that ended with this sort of reflection on signals going off into outer space. And the reason for that was after I had left, just about when I was finishing a dissertation working at Astroworld, a mechanic was killed on one of the roller coaster tracks. So it was sort of this feeling of how this death impacted the amusement space. Years after that, I became more and more interested in the design of spaces, not in the dynamics of what happens in them so much, which is most of the literature on these spaces are about, the evil theme park and employees, management, the Disney empire, the Disney version of things. So the more recent stuff, I become fascinated with creating spaces, not unlike the space we created here. And I'll say the most recent version of that, and there's always connections, but this is a connection to Tom Belstorff at UC Irvine. About a year ago, I think it was, I had a chance to give a keynote at MIT for T.L. Taylor. And viewers, if you don't know T.L. Taylor's piece, Ethnography as Play, which she quotes a lot of, Marcus Fisher, Clifford, she is coming to terms with using game design and play in ethnographic senses. So that's been the most recent iteration of this project. And then I connected with Celia Pierce, who's connected to Tom because they co-edited books on Second Life, virtual space, and so forth. So I was at MIT and Northeastern, and I did a bunch of workshops, and I have to tell you, I was so inspired, and that project those projects impacted what I did here, because I find that in doing installations and doing game designs, I met a graduate student who's doing Pan-Africanist escape rooms. For those of you that don't know what an escape room is, it's kind of like a 3D version of a game where you have a goal and you try to escape a space, so to speak. If I could do this more locally and I wasn't restricted by my bags and the weight of my bags, I probably would have had more of an escape room experience. And the only version of that you get is the little gift shop here in the corner. So to answer George's question, I think right now I'm interested in doing this kind of work. I'm not so much interested in presenting papers, and I'm definitely not as inspired to write anymore, which is strange, because I just find it so tiring and so sort of formulaic having to write, whether it's a monograph, a chapter for a book, or a journal article. I feel like there are these institutional constraints, and you can't do any of this kind of creative work, really. And that's something that's concerned you for years, writing about ethnographic texts. And one piece in particular where you write about how young authors, young anthropologists, maybe not young, but early in their careers, are really constrained and they can't do experimental work. And when Mitt Tausig, who's our sort of primogenitor quote guy here, he didn't start doing that experimental stuff until well into his career. He wasn't doing that and I think he started as a medical doctor.
So once you become an event or a thing or something, you can carry it forward.
Yeah.
But how would you introduce this kind of paradigm into the tradition of, let's say, ethnographic research and writing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, one of the things you could do, and we've talked about this, maybe we could take this space on the road and do other events at Irvine, etc. I mean, I think one thing you could do is have more, feedback systems set up in a space like this. I mean, this is the visitor's log, and there have only been a few nice comments, but just a few comments. I think one of the things you could do is experiment with, you don't really have a lot of multimedia screens that allow you to sort of write your own. I mean, there's the postcard project, which I feel like is a great way to get feedback from people because they can write their own postcard and it gets mailed. I think what you could begin to do is to set up, maybe in a style of a game, feedback systems in the space. Chris and I did a piece years ago at the Serpentine Gallery. We were part of it. We didn't do it. She hates me bringing this up. It was Yoko Ono. And by the way, Yoko Ono is reflected in these Fluxus cards in the space. It was a piece called Smile, and it was a whole retrospective of Yoko Ono's work in London at the Serpentine Gallery. And she had people smile into a camera and took photos. And Krista thought it was kind of horrible and not very interesting. I thought it was kind of cool because I'm like, we were part of a Yoko Ono piece all these years later. But you could do something like that. You could have video, still photography systems set up, even iPads where people could create a collaborative text. There's a interesting group out there called the SCP Foundation that I was talking to this interesting, if you're watching this, please tell us your name in the comments on YouTube, but he was fascinated with George's project of multi-sidedness, and he's doing maritime ethnography, riding around on cargo ships. And somehow we got talking about SCP Foundation. What it is, it's a collective fan fiction on the internet. It's very like X-Files. It imagines paranormal entities in various spaces, and then people do fictional accounts of the entities and write this collective fan fiction. So what you could do here is you could take the theme of this, the ghost captain, and you could even have people write as pirates, or you could, it might get a little corny, but you could use the theme or the trope or the concept of the exhibit, even the AI, which is maybe what we could do at Irvine. And then I think people could collectively produce their own fan fiction or their own ruminations on AI, ruminations on experimental ethnography, ruminations on multi-sidedness, ruminations on positivism and empiricist anthropology. So that component's not here, but we could easily do that. You could have people write the postcards, or people could write the journal pages and tear them out, and you could put those on the wall. In fact, you've done this at Irvine with, I think, Keith and others with sticky notes, where you do collaboration workshops. Is that right?
Well, that was in maybe 10 years ago.
Oh, that was 10 years ago?
Yeah. And
okay.
it may, and because I don't follow this world very much, it might still be a habit, a practice.
Right.
But I don't know.
Yeah.
There must be a literature now on the use of sticky notes, the rise and fall.
Oh, I would think so. Yeah. I mean, so the charrette kind of doing these collaborative projects. I've done some of that. I was telling George earlier in this conversation interview that there's a research group in Germany I've been involved with for years. And we sort of started doing traditional conference meetings, but then we just started going to theme parks. And there was a guy, Gordon Grice, we've done some work together. He's a professional architect of theme parks and very, very intellectual and into traditions of sort of classicist architecture, but then bringing that more into experiential, quotidian stuff in themed spaces. But we started to say, let's take our research group, just like we're doing here, record it and walk around in the space. So in fact, you could do that in meetings, you could do that here, have conversations on site, because you get a different dynamic than you do writing about this. And I try to take some of those conversations in the last reader and immersive spaces that I produced through Carnegie Mellon ETC Press, which has since, they've gone under, but the volume is still available as open source online. But we try to take that energy from the in situ, the on-site conversations, and do that as a text, and it really doesn't work. A conversation, even here on video, with all the pauses and the ums and so forth, is, I think, more real when you try to do that textually. And I think that was a challenge of late editions. I almost wonder if we did that now, if there'd be a multimedia component. You'd have a supplemental web page with interviews, experimental videos, because then I think you could really get more of that, life energy happening. In fact, there's a quote on the wall here. It says here, and I don't know if it was AI, but it says, it was a process rather, but you made it a product. And for me, the enduring challenge of both anthropology and like some of the conceptual art stuff that really inspired me when I was at Rice in the early 90s, it's saying the same thing. It's saying you have this life out in the world, people walking around talking, having these conversations, and then the artist tries to represent that, and then the ethnographer tries to represent that, and you're taking something that's full of life and you're kind of turning it into this static entity. And I think that's the enduring challenge of ethnography is, Geertz's cockfight is such a monumental piece, but when you really look at it, it's one of the most, I don't want to say overproduced, I'm using overproduced as a metaphor to say, Geertz took how many cockfights and made one archetypal cockfight, right? And that was the point in Cropenzano's piece, when he looked at Herder, Caitlin, Goethe, not Herder. Yeah, Goethe, Caitlin, and I think Geertz. Yeah, so that life, so for me, that was a foundational quote for this project. You have a process-oriented thing in, say, concept art, Alan Caprow, Dick Higgins, those 60s cats doing, art and life stuff, and then the same thing with ethnography. You're taking life and you're taking movement and you're taking happenings and you're confining it to a very, instrumental, institutional space of a text, a journal article, etc. And that's always bothered me, I guess. And I think it's bothered you because the whole point of what writing culture was saying was to take on the institutional idea that there's an objective text that can represent Mandan culture or Balinese culture or whatever, Goethe doing the Roman festival or whatever he was doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, but you don't think that this idea or this theory or philosophy of representation is still current? I mean, it is ideologically.
Yeah.
Anthro 101, even to graduate students.
Oh, yeah.
But people who are doing this kind of work, after all these years of critique and other kinds of influences, know better. Also, the opening within anthropology to, even though some people might disagree and limit it, but ideologically opening to art practices, somehow being creative in that way. So, okay, that's a general statement of mood. But we're not, most people who are training in anthropology, they're fine when they're trying to deliver their passions to what students do. But if they're not, it's person to person, kind of often a very weak thing. It's always been inspirational person to person who do it well. But once you create it as a paradigm of the discipline's method, it becomes, you have to deal with a lot of mediocrity.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes institutionalized, and I think that, all these years later, sort of realizing what was happening at Rice, and when I got there, it was, a few years after writing culture, but that energy was still there, and just in the conversations we would have in the reading room, there was an energy there.
Appreciate the fact you've always moved to your own drummer, and the idea, in a that metaphor. So, how would you say, in your own work, don't worry about what the discipline does with it, this has evolved? For instance, you didn't publish a book on your dissertation, yet the chapters, or how did you get from there? There are practical career reasons maybe, but to immersive handbook, and what did you say is
the experimental world's handbook would be the second, the remix.
Yeah, and the other thing is, even though you're very modest, are these substitutes within the framework of the world of anthropology up to or do justice to your imagination?
Are really hard questions, but I think I'm trying to look at that trajectory and see when I started moving away from sort of studying the theme park as an ethnographic object and getting into practice and getting into the idea of, okay, when we design a space, and there are bits and pieces in the Immersive Worlds Handbook, there's a section where the only avant-garde stuff that makes it in there, that wheel I talked about earlier didn't for production reasons, there's a reference to the Odessa step sequence from Eisenstein's Potemkin, which has always been like so influential, just at all levels for me conceptually in terms of representation, just thinking about how to see the world, how to represent it, of course. But I think there was a movement at some point where I said, I was at this conference with Margaret King, who is someone, she's been doing this work forever from the museum studies perspective, studying theme parks. I want to say it was like 2005 or something, or 4. It was very early on in my career. I was at the TIA, which is the Theme Entertainment Association. I was giving a talk with Margaret and her husband Jamie, and they run a consulting firm kind of bringing museum studies ideas into the theme park, which was always a part of my consciousness. When I was at Iowa, they had a museum studies track in the Anthro department that I found very intriguing. But so we were giving this talk at the TIA conference in Orlando. We were at Disney. We were at, what's the name of it? The old Pleasure Island. It was Disney's attempt to do alcohol nightclubs. They had the adult version. It was literally closing like a month after we had our conference there. And I had the audacity. I was up there on stage, and I gave the heaviest dose of, all the avant-garde folks, and I was talking about how all these theme park designers at this conference needed to transform their spaces and bring in, who was the guy that made the Merzbau, the Dadaist. They needed to do like that version, build the Merzbau at Disney theme parks or Universal theme parks. And I think people hated it. I think people thought it was like ridiculous that this guy, this academic, is sort of like telling us how to do things. So since that time, in the maybe next 10, 15 years, I try to use more the vernacular of the folks in the design industry. So the fourth wall, which is something when you did your thing, which I love, the Orlan thing in France when they were serving you caviar and the best Bordeaux's but the fourth wall as a piece of lingo is something that people in the design industries and theme parks can understand. So in those subsequent years, I said I still want to keep this notion of trying to do something radical in these spaces of theme parks, but I will somehow sneak it in, because you can't go to a theme park conference and lecture people about how they need to do postmodern Rem Koolhaas style architectural techniques in their spaces. So I think over the years I've said I want to interfere with that space. I want to introduce some ideas and kind of the bit of interest, and I've signed Disney NDAs, so maybe I'll edit this a little bit. They're very restrictive. But years ago, with a guy from UCLA, David Shorter, who's a more traditional ethnographer, he studies the Yaqui, which was Carlos Castaneda's group in Mexico, I think, right? Yeah, the Yaqui. And we were invited out of the blue. I had not produced but one book, and somehow this Imagineer, her name is Trish, and she's now writing romance novels and making, I think, millions of dollars. She invited me and David to do this 2-day charrette with Disney Imagineers, people from ABC, comedy, people from the products division, all the big Imagineers. Scott Trowbridge was there, who has designed all the Disney Star Wars theme lands that you see around the world. And we did this workshop that helped these Imagineers sort of, quote, get it right in terms of creating these 4 worlds. And so I was a little mystified. It was the opposite of what I did at that TIA conference, where I was, Dr. Avant-Garde trying to introduce all these concepts. I thought these people need a very basic anthro course, if you will. So basically in these workshops, I did a version of, if you go back to Morgan, Maine, and maybe Kroeber, their sort of anthropology texts that are all the classic moments of what a culture is about, the geography, the food, the subsistence patterns. Because what they wanted was the 2 anthropologists to come in to rotate between the 4 workshop spaces of these 4 worlds and to help them get it right. So we were the anthropologists there giving the stamp of authenticity of the cultures they were creating. But that kind of worked, to be honest with you, George. I think so the one thing I've tried to do over all these years is try to introduce these experimental means or methods or ideas into conversations with the real designers of theme spaces. But I think the second thing is to create collaborative opportunities, and that was inspired by Late Editions. Again, Late Editions being the series that tried to have uncanny, maybe timely conversations between journalists, folks working in science, folks working in the art worlds, and trying to create a new ethnographic model, a new model of interviews. So I think I was inspired by that to create these, it's mostly with Europeans, I don't know why, but these conversations among professionals and academics about the same spaces that they're studying or creating, but from different perspectives. And I think where this may lead next with the gaming studies influence is try to create a LARP. And a LARP is a live action role-playing game. Very big in Europe.
Yeah.
But with one of the German guys, when I was teaching at Johannes Gutenberg University, JGU, when I was doing American Studies on this gig over the summer, I've now said to him, his name is Florian, I said, hey, what if we do a LARP? What if we try to create a version of this, but we add on to the immersive space the performance side of things. So George would be the captain, you would have on your captain's hat, and you would play a role. And then what you do, I think you would do the LARP, let's say, for an hour or two, and then you would get out of character and you do the meta work. And so you have a conversation about what it is that you did in that LARP moment. So I think that could be very cool as well. Kind of bring all these pieces together. So, yeah.
It's quite doable, right?
It's very doable. Again, it depends on how extravagant you want to be. There's a guy in the Immersive Worlds Handbook, Gordon Jones, that I met at a very early theme park conference I always remember it because Heidegger was rector there when he got into trouble and sided with the Nazis. Not in Mainz, but it's in the Black Forest. Yeah. Anyway, that university, I met this guy Gordon, and he does Civil War reenactment, PhD and historian, but he runs the Atlanta History Center, and his big thing in reenactment is to look at the different levels of authenticity or quote realism that people take on. And he talks about how you have people that are, not very authentic when they do these reenactments and they have their cell phones. And then these super authentic people, hardcore, they would be the version of George Cushing or those guys going native and becoming a Zuni war priest or whatever, rain priest. And they're so identified with the reenactment that they actually imagine themselves kind of like Collingwood, right, the historian, time traveling and embodying the persona of the person that they're recreating or reenacting. So what gets curious to me when you do this, just like the ethnographic project, is to what degree you want to go native and begin to embody the people that you're playing, the roles that you're playing. And actually the Orlan, I don't know how the Orlan thing came up in this project, but you'll see there's a few pages in the Captain's Journal where I discovered, because we were talking about on Zoom, George and I found there's a transcript of it online. And what I found fascinating was that Orlan and you were speaking through this language of theater, but it almost seems like Orlan needs you there to legitimate what she's doing. But then you never, of course, you're not going to get plastic surgery or into your face, but maybe you could talk about that, because I find like when you connect the ethnographer and the artist, there's always that legitimation crisis that Habermas talked about, or Lyotard's incommensurability. Like, you're trying to do something similar, but it's not quite matching up.
That meeting on stage with Orlan was such an inspiration to you, and you thought about it much more richly than it actually was, because there was a language issue.
So it was translation?
She was speaking French. I was speaking English.
Oh, so did you have an earpiece? Or?
No. Well, I understand some French, but I guess she understood. I don't think she understood it much English. Okay. No. So there was a communicational thing.
I see.
The other thing I remember is that Richard Schechner, who was a big personality at this conference, he more or less evoked images of what collaborations would be, etc. Not in an arrogant way, just in a very vivid way.
Right.
And his commentaries on that, as I recall, I'm not sure that they're preserved, on that exchange were very interesting. But of course, he was developing his own thing. Yeah.
Schechner might be the early, and I had the pleasure of seeing him give the keynote at this performance studies conference at NYU ages ago. This was probably, I might have still been a student at Rice, but he was for me the early guy because of Victor Turner of connecting the dots of ethnography and aesthetics.
Turner was a very dramaturgical type. In fact, he used the term dramaturgical type guy. And so I'm not as familiar as I should be with whatever was published from their exchanges. But my impression was it went more deeply into that trope of dramaturgy and the field situation. Anyhow, I'm just stating conditions. But yours is more interesting in a way in that you carry this kind of, by training and so forth, this ideology of ethnography, which I find very often in art fields that are talking about the design of setups and missing. Sometimes doesn't need to be there. But sort of, to thoroughly make that connection, especially since I think from the ethnographic side, there's not desperate, but there's a highly motivated desire for that now. And it's, as we see in the show, it's variably being met. But it takes the anthropologists wanted to leap immediately to the ideology of an artist. So I have license for whatever I produce because I'm in this space. And it has nothing to do with the training, with the attitude toward something like ethnography in the training of art students or in dramaturgical training. And I saw this when I worked with Luke and Christine, but primarily Luke, who is, his imagination, it has to, if you're doing this collaboration, constantly has to be shaped. Now you would think they do it between themselves, husband and wife, one anthro, one. And I think they do, but I actually think in a much more directed way. And that was the promise of that collaboration we were doing. I loved it, but for various reasons it was flawed. The project at the WTO was flawed. I think I didn't perform well.
I think it'd be too hard.
With them. I think I was thrilled by what they were doing. But I didn't sort of say, improv dance, why improv dance? Maybe not so much. But I just let them do their thing. And I was entranced by it. I mean, I had commentaries. I said, well, if they're doing this, the thing about inscription in a bureaucratic organization. So besides evoking trade, how do they show this bureaucratic side of trade monitoring? I mean, it sounds kind of boring, but that's what they have to sort of incorporate into the skin, if you want. I'm sure it's nothing new. I'm sure this is how theater is produced. But I was just, theater, dramaturgy and stuff like that. I'm fascinated by all those processes, but, I looked it up on Amazon Books, and there's so much writing on, let's say, dramaturgy, things like the scenography, and I was neither inspired and I just got overwhelmed by it. So The idea, you are a kind of practicing artist, ethnographer.
Something.
Well, you have a lot of experience in creating
These kinds of
things.
things,
Yeah. And you have to have that.
Yeah.
Because in the end, these covering categories don't matter. And the idea is, can the writing on this deliver the potential for people who are not in the theater? Because they all turn out to be handbook-like, et cetera. Anyhow, this is a matter-of-fact thing.
So I don't forget, two quick thoughts on actually handbook. I was thinking of your point about how there's a plethora of these kinds of projects now, reflections on them. If you look at over the years, the evolution of I think you've been in there, the Sage Handbook of Qualitative Research. It's like this thick. And over the years, it was kind of traditional. And then the last iteration, I don't know if they're doing a new one. Katie Stewart, who, by the way, there's a fest trip for her, I think tomorrow night here in this space. For Katie Stewart in this space. I think tomorrow. Katie was on a panel years ago with me and Sandy Stone and Doreen Kondo. And Katie has a piece in that handbook now. So I feel like that's a optimistic, positive reflection that over the years, that handbook, which is very rigorous and $400 hardback, it's bringing in more of this experimental stuff, the dramaturgical stuff, the multimodal stuff. I mean, Katie's stuff, particularly her book on Texas, it's these little poetic vignettes. It's very, very non-traditional as a narrative form. So that's the first thing I want to say. Second, I think you were being hard on yourself about the WTO project, because what you described, that feeling of awe, that wonder when you see this kind of world, it's exactly what I felt when I did the thing for Disney, the workshop. They took me to the back rooms. Again, I signed many NDAs. I couldn't even list on my CV that I did that project for Disney. They're so restrictive. But they took me to this back room where they had all the concept drawings and the models of all the original Disney rides. And there was one that was like Salvador Dali version of, and I didn't even dare ask, but I was in such awe for those 2 days that I was kind of awkward, and I felt like I'm not doing so. I bet you were in the same situation. And in fact, it reminds me of what you said about the paratext and how we are almost this parasitical entity trying to do this work, it's way different to interview. You have access to a Tongan elite, but if you want to interview the head of the WTO or one of these other, even your work with the Marquis in Ocasio, which is a very inspirational book that I think not enough people have read. You had access, but if you don't have access and you're part of their space, like when you're part of being on stage with Orlan was the show, and you were the legitimate force to show that Orlan had relevance outside of the art world. So I think you're being too hard on yourself in the WTO project, because when you're in a space that is commanded, that is owned by someone else, including the discourse about it, how can you be anything other than I was at Disney?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about WTO project, the reason why we're self-critical about it is it could have been great, but nobody really bought into it, including Mark Abeles, who organized it.
Really?
The thing as it went along turned out to be a considerable disappointment to everyone in their own way.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I have to admit it. Yeah. And we still, because it was heavily funded and there are expectations, but you can see in the product from it, there's this collective book in French that has, because the CNRS paid for it, but it has no life. It didn't reflect our performance. It reflected something else. Jay Chung, who was phenomenal and who put her heart into it, turned out to be flat. I mean, it's sort of like the ball that lost its air. And anyhow, I just wanted to say that. But
yeah. I mean, probably the failed projects, I think, have a certain.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at literatures that write well about messiness, because you don't have to justify the end. It's like Walter Murch on film editing and stuff. I have his latest big book. He's done many, And it's how they set up the opening for what is that great thing on the border with Charlton Heston and what's his name? Yeah, there's a long thing about the opening, this sweeping, unique opening shot and how it was done. Anyhow, there's less readable stuff in this, but they're quite comfortable writing about extraordinarily messy process that somehow in the end, because it's commercial, it's a business, gets cleaned up and presentational, right? And when we doing in theater in the same way. So Luke doesn't really have to worry about it when he's involved in all these projects. He just has to do his job, and there are others to tell him, advise him, right? Whereas what we were doing had no order in that way, no niche. And very, I think that's an issue. It sounds like a boring job, but somebody who could write the transitional between doing ethnography and doing this, and it might exist in that side literature on performance and stuff. I don't know, but you embody it in the in sort of the work that you do, and there are some reference points. But really, what you care most about. I mean, I'm projecting. You care most about the work. As performance at the moment as a thing, and the other stuff is fine. In fact, it can be so. That's why I was so interested in the immersive handbooks. You've been doing this stuff for years, but to talk about it, so finally you kind of ethnographize what you've been doing. I don't know about ethnographize. You make and so the handbook. It's not a. It's a usable book. It's not a readable book. But it's not meant to be. But so that's the reason why I didn't read it closely, but I read into it, and I really admired the idea that, but it's not the idea of handbooks and how to do's and stuff, but in a way, the immersive handbook, the attraction to me was it was pitched to the subjects. It was trying to make people who want to commercialize or do something in an environment to understand the idea of immersion. And you're working back toward representation and stuff like that. But none of that is, it's really where, the work meets the what's at stake. So anyhow, maybe I'm not being very precise, but I think you're being so I think the following, which is what what you call it, Experimental World's Handbook.
Book, I don't know. And I recently there's a new, and this is kind of advice I think if you're graduate students watching this, that to learn from mistakes. We talk about mistakes, but what I'm trying to do now is to seek out spaces and collaborators that I'm interested in. That sounds very sort of obvious, but folks who share a vision. And so recently I hooked up with a group. They sounded very boring, the Scottish Antiquarian Society, but they're doing this radical work on political stuff, LGBTQI stuff, but using games and archaeology, and they're really looking very critically at colonialism. They're looking at, repatriation, all the Elgin marbles kinds of issues, and British Museum kinds of issues. And that's where I got this idea of maybe creating my own LARP in a classroom space or for a conference. But I think my 2 points about this is to seek out groups of people, conferences, and spaces that are amenable to doing this work, because I have to be honest with you, going to AAA, I always feel kind of miserable. I mean, I love seeing the graduate students, but the institutional sort of conference where you go and you stand up on a podium and you give a paper, and you can't even years ago I tried to do at a conference, I forget what the hell it was. It might have been AAA, I think it was AAA. And I tried to I put some speakers around the room and played some sounds, and people looked at me like I was mad. They said, what, sort of these looks like, what are you doing? So for me, it's avoiding those kinds of spaces, and inevitably I started turning down opportunities because people asked me, you know, well, not at AAA so much, but you know, to go to traditional conferences or to write traditional articles about theme parks or theme spaces, but in very traditional ways. So I tried to say no to some of those and yes to groups that I think have a bit of a
No, I understand everything you said, and I understand it. But I want to say that bridging that gap, if you have, if you have that kind of ambition, you might not. But bridging that gap, well, there are a lot. Look at this stuff. There's a lot of effort right now because anthropology had lost its paradigm, et cetera. This has been very true. Of course, I'm an old fart, and I'm going to say things like this. A younger person would give a different version of what I'm saying. And so they shrug, it's a space friendly and interesting in which I can do what I'm interested in. It has to come back to get your audience, to justification. But it shouldn't start that way. Anyhow, I'm just lecturing on, what to do good. But so in your case, you've had an amazing curiosity and independent, and I mean it, about things. The idea is how to find the discourse community for it. You do, I noticed, do a lot of music, etc. So you have a variety of media groups, forums, and so forth. But how to capture the anthropology one, to the extent that you care about it, is an interesting puzzle for those people still back in anthropology trying to reform what they're doing. Anyhow, what I'm saying is obvious. You give a good account of.
Yeah. You know, the funny anecdote I thought of when I was in the Black Forest at that kind of traditionalist conference, it was traditional anthropology people who were studying theme parks and museum spaces in very traditional ways, but I ended up going during that conference to Europa Park, which is a very interesting German park. They I think Mac Industries created it. They have all their own IP, intellectual property, so it's not Disney or Universal. So it makes it fascinating and more folksy. There's a lot of German folk tales that they involve. But I had this wonderful meeting with this architect and general manager of the park, and I said, hey, I just want to hang out and talk to you about your design process. And the guy was very transparent. Michael Dendelk is his name, and he's now, I saw him on a show. He moved up since those days, and he's the head of a really big arm of the same, like the Imagineering group, but for Universal. They do all the design work. So I met with him, and he took me through the whole design process, and he was the most transparent informant I've ever met. I started talking about, how do you respond to critiques of the work that you do here? Because at the time, he was designing the new Norway pavilion, and he took me on some rides, and he was all dressed up, and we were riding together. We looked kind of awkward with all the other guests, but he showed me a design framework, and I said, well, how do you respond to the folks who are very critical of the work you do? And he said, oh yeah, I've read Baudrillard, I know all that stuff, and we do what we do. And I said, okay, take me through the initial stage of your design project as you were designing the Norway area. Or no, it was Iceland. I'm sorry, it was Iceland. I was thinking Norway because we have a group from Norway here, the Iceland Pavilion. And he said, oh yeah, I start and I Google images of Iceland. And I had kind of this luck. I said, wait, you start with the Google version? Oh yeah, because that's what people know in their minds and stuff. So he was very transparent about the whole process. And then later, after I talked to Michael, I talked with the general manager, and I was sitting down, and we had this, they had these expensive cappuccino machines. We had some nice espressos, and he said, oh, I'm just really surprised that you're so friendly. And I said, well, what do you mean, very friendly? I wrote about this whole exchange in a couple of chapters of books I've done. And he said, well, we had these other two anthropologists, and I immediately knew they were the anthropologists from that conference I was attending that week. And they were so rude to us, and they condemned us, and they said we were all doing racist stereotypes of different cultures. And it was this kind of moment of to talk about bridging discourse and dialogue, I had this epiphany about how to kind of engage with two communities, the design communities I work with, and then journalists. And I just recently did a interview with a journalist from the Wall Street Journal on American theme parks and nostalgia and history. And one thing I discovered, I will never, as George asked, I will never figure out how to bridge the gap with traditional anthropologists. And frankly, I maybe don't want to, but I figured out some great techniques to bridge gaps and to have dialogues with the design community and with journalists. And actually journalists, talking to them and expressing these ideas, I think is one way to kind of do that secret project I have to sneak in my stuff and the ethnographic stuff and the experimental stuff into the bigger world, because the anthropologists that go and condemn the people who are, they frankly don't have it. They don't get, you can't do that, right? Like the initial sort of discourse coming out for the last 100 years in anthropology is respect your informant's voice. And it's very funny that not the George Marcus, Michael Fisher culture critique, but the generic culture critique that anthropologists do when they study Disney, even the book, Fadelman's book for the Westview series that you did, Institutional Futures, I think it was called, they really...
No, you mean which one for
the one for Westview.
On Disneyland?
Vinyl Leaves.
Vinyl Leaves.
Yeah. Vinyl Leaves. Yeah. But they get caught up in this mode of cultural critique, the generic culture critique, that really is frankly tiring. And there's one piece that's been written on this. I've done a few, but Grail Marcus, who wrote the Dead Elvis book, he wrote a piece for Marling's thing at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis when they did a big exhibit. And his piece really profoundly says what a lot of us have thought these years, is that these anthropologists that use Disney as kind of the straw man to study, colonialist representations of culture, et cetera, there's really nothing imaginative about what they're doing. And the reason for that, I think, is they're not bridging a gap that exists, between the folks they're studying and their world. So in a sense, they're violating the basic tenet of culture anthropology, which is know thy informant, right? And try to speak in their language. So that's a strange realization for me that I think I've only figured out over the last couple of years or so, is you cannot go into this and sort of take this mode of cultural critique and insult the people who are creating something that you deem to be offensive because it's a Disney-fied version of something. Yeah. So that's a very interesting thing, because in a sense I hold anthropologists guilty of the very thing that they should be doing, which is understanding the worlds they're studying.
It's critiqued several times.
Yeah.
And hopefully
Yeah.
when, with a background of motivation.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. You've never been into academic provocation.
No,
Do you know what I mean by academic provocation?
No.
Meaning writing this, it's not a critique like, anthropology, it's sort of creating an alternative that they desire
Right.
in a informed way,
Yeah.
while also criticizing the way they go about it. But yeah, I don't know. Is this stuff still being recorded, or are we beyond recording?
Yeah. No, it's,
So I
should we
think,
break from it, or-
yeah, let's break. I have to go off for a while.
do that. Yeah,
Did you want to get some lunch or something?
Oh, yeah. Do you want to get, there's pizza next door. It's amazing.
Yeah, I could. Yeah,
Okay.
that would be easy.
Let's
I
do
was
that.
going to go downtown for about a half